Hi, I'm Emmy, and you are listening to Starting to Scale, a podcast for founders that want to grow a successful, profitable business, but also make a positive impact. I'm going to be talking to lots of founders that are already doing that, to experts that are helping them on their journey. I'm here to help you start up, scale up, get through seed funding and on to Series A. So let's get on with the show. I hope you enjoy it. Today on Starting to Scale, I have David from Avery Law, and he is going to talk to us about preparing your startup for its first fundraising and what to expect during that fundraising process. So David, do introduce yourself, tell us a little about what you do and why you said you're very passionate about helping entrepreneurs and business owners. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you do.
Sure, thanks, Emmy. Hi, my name's David, one of the co-founders of Avery Law. Just a little bit about Avery Law, just before we get on to me. So we are essentially a small corporate boutique specialising in the growth tech sector. I sort of come from an experience of doing quite large-scale M&A activities, sort of cross-border jurisdiction matters. And from doing all of those large deals, I decided that I'm going to take all of that experience and really bring it to the masses of the startup, scale-up community, something which I'm sort of personally very passionate about. I've always been very interested in technology from a young age. And essentially, that's why and where Avery Law came from. We've been going, I think it's coming up to 8 years now.
Amazing. And so you believe, well, you found a sort of a gap in the market or a particular niche where you can take all your expertise and learnings from, working on, bigger projects to help the startups and scale ups that really need someone like you. And it sounds like your business is booming.
Yes, I mean, that's really sort of one of our, I suppose, key selling points of being a small boutique. We can capitalize and help out people in quite a niche area where normally, especially within London, your only options were probably the larger law firms. And because of being a larger law firm with high operational costs, it's difficult to find low cost value legal services. So generally, the view of lawyers across the market is, oh, God, they're expensive. And people get put off by that. So we really wanted to change and disrupt people's views of lawyers and try to bring that real high-level experience to a much larger, cost-effective scale.
Brilliant. So let's crack on with the interview because we're going to be talking about how to prepare your startup for its first fundraise. So I'd love to know your thoughts on that. Obviously, you've got lots of experience of working with businesses who are raising money for the first time. And I think if you haven't raised money before, it is, kind of an unknown, isn't it? So it would be great to hear your insight on that.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people, certainly what I've found is they either come to lawyers too early or too late in the process of fundraising. And finding that sweet spot, I think that's really key to a successful fundraise. And a lot of startups can prepare themselves for that, by finding a good lawyer at the right time who can help them sort of battle their way through all the legal jargon. So I think when they are approaching investors, even if it's a family and friends sort of set of investors, they are well versed when it comes to all this legal terminology, which can often stump people. I think that's sort of a really important first point.
Good to be prepared before you even get to the point of finding investors.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of groundwork or homework, let's say, that a founder of a startup will need to have done before they even attempt to write that email to the fund or the accelerator fund. with their pitch deck. And I suppose that sort of goes on to the next part of the sort of pre-pack your fundraise is your pitch deck, the business plan aspect.
So what is the groundwork that they need to do before they send that email?
So from my perspective, it would be understanding, and there's obviously a lot of business specialists who can help them understand runways. So that is the amount of money they actually require to do what they essentially would like to do, whether it be development of a particular product, marketing. Those two angles are probably what I see in my experience as being the two highest costs, and also staffing costs in the short term for a startup's life cycle.
Yeah.
So finding someone to help with the pitch deck is essential, in my opinion, because an investor will probably get, I don't know, pick a number, 100 of these a week.
Yeah.
Probably more. So having something that is something which looks like someone with an experienced shoulder has had a sort of eye over, I think will give them an upper hand. So that will all go a long way in terms of sort of preparing for a fundraise.
And I was just going to ask, what do they need to prepare sort of legally with, what you said it's good to get a lawyer before you first kind of get in touch with those investors. Do they need to see anything at that point? Or do you come into play once everything's been agreed?
Yeah, so something we try to help people is almost dummy run a fundraise. So what to expect in the process. There's a whole host of legal documentation that will need to be entered into. But I think the most important thing is actually sort of thinking about what an investor might ask. And I suppose it really goes to what is the business. So, for example, you are a med tech company or a prop tech company. The key component or asset will be your intellectual property. So what have you done to protect that in the short term so that your investors will see that you are taking already good business decisions as a founder of business? So using a lawyer to think about how to protect that intellectual property in the short term.
So what would that be? Are you talking about trademarking?
For example, that would be something that's almost expected from an investor. But trademarks often, and I'm not a trademark expert by any means, but it's important because I've seen people try to file their own trademarks, for example, without help. And often they'll be challenged or opposed by people with other trademarks. So it's good to have lawyers involved with that process because a sort of little bit of legal spend can go a long way in protecting an asset like intellectual property. Something that's really important, which I see a lot, is thinking about an investor's due diligence process. So running almost like a mini investor questionnaire, management questionnaire, asking yourself a whole host of questions about the state of your business, even if it's 2 months old. What is there behind the scenes? What skeletons do you have in the closet?
Yeah, because basically they're going to ask all those questions, aren't they? So you want to have everything ready and prepared for them, because otherwise it just is going to drag out the process, I presume, or the investors are going to find something and say no.
Absolutely. And it also promotes transparency. And I think that's a real key thing when it comes to showing an investor what you are like as a founder. It's never going to be good in the long run if you've hidden something because you're worried or not worried. You just don't know whether to disclose it or not to an investor in the short term. If you do disclose something, it shows that you're transparent. It's a really important thing to do when it comes to fundraising.
Yeah, no, I can see that. It's brilliant. So that's all the sort of prep stuff, but you also help with SEIS, don't you, and EIS, and getting businesses advanced assurance, is that right? And is that something they need, advanced assurance? Is that what investors want, and is it kind of necessary, and that is something that you help with, is that correct?
Yeah, so that's correct. I mean, generally, the investor reliefs available in this country are fantastic. There's also a lot of talk at the moment within the current climate with coronavirus about whether or not those reliefs are going to be increased or not. So watch this space.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, so really they are crucial to a fundraise with, let's say, family and friends. Not so much family because there is eligibility criteria, but friends and high net worth angel investors and EIS funds. Making sure that your company is SEIS or EIS eligible is key. It can attract a lot of investment where you otherwise didn't think it'd be possible. It's important as a sort of condition to fundraising, but it's not essential. Now, we always recommend it based on once you are aware who is going to invest in your company and you know what you're going to do and how much you're going to raise, then we recommend seeking that advance assurance. Any earlier, now that the rules have slightly changed with the process, HMRC will throw it back at you. So they now want to know names of investors. They want to know exactly what you're doing. They probably want to see your documentation. So having a good lawyer in place will help to identify when is the correct time to apply for that. So it essentially comes back as soon as possible without delay or lots of questions fired.
That's brilliant, because that is something that I think investors do want to see, isn't it? I mean, ideally. And so if you can provide them with that and you've got someone to help you with that process, then that's fantastic. And so what's the kind of amount that you're seeing, sort of a general amount that you're seeing these first time startups raise money? Are they normally just getting the SEIS, or are they getting, which is 150 grand at the moment, isn't it? 150,000, or are they getting EIS as well? Or does it just totally depend on what the business is?
Yeah, I mean, it's I suppose answering that is how long is a piece of string. It all depends on runways and how much these businesses require. And I suppose the hardest question for any founder is how much equity do you give away if it's a pure equity fundraise? There's lots of really important and really great tools on the internet for that.
Would you be able to share? Yeah, would you be able to share any of those in the show notes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a very great sort of equity guide by Seedcamp, even though it's sort of US focused. It is a really good base for understanding how much equity to give away at a fundraise. But generally, I think going back to that point you raised about whether people raise SEIS and then EIS, because the rules were slightly relaxed a few years ago on the SEIS, EIS. So before you would have had to have just raised the SEIS and then had spent 70% before you could do an EIS fundraise. Now you can do them simultaneously, which is fantastic. So it allows companies to raise more under both reliefs.
Yeah, it is a great relief, isn't it? I mean, it's fantastic. If you've got a good business, then it's such a great deal for the investors that it must really, really help people to get that first fundraise. So we covered off the basics of preparing for that first fundraise.
Yes, I think that's sort of the elements of a pre-fundraise, making sure you're ready, understanding things that can be done, and then there's obviously the sort of during process, what happens, how to complete, how to get your money in the bank account.
Which is obviously the exciting bit. And so if you are prepared, how long does that process take? Or are you going to say it's as long as a piece of string?
I think like most of these things, it really depends on what we call the composition of the round. So who's actually fundraising, how much experience do they have? Generally, if you see if it's your first fundraise and you have an accelerator fund, what they're going to do is they're going to throw a bunch of paperwork at you and say, these are our sort of general sales agreement, subscription agreement, also known as investment agreement, sign on the dotted line. I wouldn't recommend that. I would recommend you have a lawyer just flick through them. Generally, they are market standard, but there are some things that people need to be aware of. If you have first-time angel investors, they sometimes do want to get their fingers dirty by reading through everything and providing comments, but that's where a lawyer can come. It can help sort of in terms of being bad cop for the founder. So wrapping everyone in up and moving quickly with the fundraise.
Yeah, because you don't want to, I suppose, if it's taking a long time on both sides, that can really delay things, and then that has a massive impact, doesn't it, if you need the cash?
Yeah, and it also takes founders away from actually running and managing a business, because founders will be required to focus on the legals, the fundraise, the communications with investors, making sure everyone's kept up to speed with the process. And if they're spending 4 or 5 hours a day doing that, it's not particularly helping the business in the long run.
No, I remember when we secured investment, just having to go through all those documents, and as a founder, it's really, really difficult. And I can completely see how having a great lawyer helping with that process and speed it up, it just makes such a difference. So what do we expect during the fundraising process once, what's that process?
I think once you've sort of understood who is coming in on the round, your composition, it's really important to understand what sort of documents are going to come your way from the investors or from your lawyers if they're preparing for a friends and family round, for example. So your real basic documents such as your shareholders agreement, your articles of association, and your investment agreement, your subscription agreement. These fundamental documents to a fundraise on a pure equity fundraise. You might see different documents on a debt fundraise, but a majority of early stage fundraisers are straight equity. Interestingly,
I was just going to say, just really quickly, so if you just clarify that, so equity is purely for shares and debt is for debt. And they're going to pay that back, whereas with the shares, they're giving away shares in their business.
Yeah, correct. And there is one sort of quasi bridge between the two, which is sort of your advanced subscription, which interestingly is an SEIS, EIS eligible way of raising money without giving shares away at the time you bring the money into the bank account. The only caveat to that, as of December last year, was that HMRC has now put a 6-month long stop on the conversion of this debt. Well, it's not debt for HMRC purpose, but the advanced proceeds being converted into shares.
Yeah, I'm working with a client at the moment that's doing that. So it just gives you a bit longer to get the money in. Or if you want to get it from a number of sources.
Yeah, and sort of looking at coronavirus and the current situation, a lot of people, because what I've seen generally is a huge decrease in people's valuations given what's going on, because investors are not quite sure what's going to happen in the long term or what the long-term effects are on people's businesses. So valuations have been slashed in half. And as a result, it's probably an interesting idea to think about an advanced subscription right now in order to raise cash quite quickly so that you don't have to have a valuation discussion, because you can get money in the bank account. You can set floor and ceilings in sort of hope for an anticipated fundraising in the long term, but just get money in quickly.
That's interesting. So when you say slashed in half, is it really like that bad, the valuations?
From my experience, I've seen it a few times.
That's not good. Cool. So we were just talking about the fundraising process, and I kind of went off on a tangent, but you were saying got all those documentations together. You're helping the founders, you're sort of helping the founders and the investors get that over the line. And then it gets signed, and then is that it?
Yeah, so there's normally a couple of rounds of negotiation. When it comes to, we sort of approached on the sort of management questionnaire and cobwebs out of the cupboard sort of matters earlier. There'll be a disclosure exercise as part of the process where we, the lawyers, would help the founders essentially spell out in very fair and clear drafting some of these matters which we think the investors should be aware of. Now, that will protect the founders when it comes to the subscription, because the founders will, almost certainly be asked for providing what's known as warranties.
Yeah.
Warranties are contractual sort of statements and promises made to the investors on which they then rely about the state of the business and its shareholding, for example, lots of other matters, intellectual property, for example. So that part is really important. I think so. One thing founders never really understand until they see these paperwork, the investment agreement particularly, is that they will be required to put what I call skin in the game. i.e. investors will require personal liability of the founders up to a certain point. It's normally capped at about 1 or 1.5 times annual salary. But there is this element of personal liability that no one really thinks about when they're raising funds.
I remember.
Obviously,
I remember doing that. It's quite scary when you're like, oh my gosh, I've got to,
Yeah, so something I like to sort of suggest, a lot of investors push back on this quite heavily, but something quite neat which I try and push on is to allow a founder to actually honour any potential claim by transferring their shares to the investors, if they don't want to put their hands in their pockets. It's another sort of neat mechanism, but something that founders aren't really aware of until they get the paperwork.
No, exactly. And also I just remember thinking, I hope I have told them everything that ever happened, but in case something, because we had to do it when we sold our business as well. It's the same kind of thing, isn't it? When we sold our business on. So yeah, that is actually really interesting. And that's obviously a great process that you're saying you will do with your clients before they even meet the investors. You've been through this process with them, so it's not all a shock.
Yeah. So they sort of are prepared. They know what to expect. Moving on from that, they know what sort of board composition might look like. An investor will normally demand a board seat or an observer, right? Someone who can observe but not speak.
I'd love to chat to you more in another episode about the board and the diversity of the board and why that's important, but we could probably do a whole episode on that separately. But yeah, so basically normally one investor would sit on the board.
Yeah, an investor will always want to protect their investment. So aside from having various material consent or veto rights on certain things like the issue of fresh shares in the company following the fundraise, they'll also probably strategically want to sit on the board and make sure their investment is protected, try and understand operationally how the company is spending its investment, and to get a better understanding of the founders involved in the process. Because the first fundraise, certainly from what I've understood, is not necessarily about putting cash into a business and seeing whether the business is actually investing in the founders as well. And you'll find that, I suppose no one likes to talk about it, but startups do fail more than they succeed. But startups will always be startups and founders will always be entrepreneurial. So there will always be opportunities for them to find that unicorn, as everyone calls them.
It's really interesting. And also, if you get the right investor, it's great that they're going to sit on your board because they're going to bring all their expertise, and that's obviously worth a lot, isn't it? It's not just the money, but that to have someone of that experience who's probably got investments in other businesses, that's actually, that for me would be a really strong additional value add. But I suppose then you've also got, then you've got them on the board, haven't you? Making sure that you are committed and delivering, and hopefully they're supporting you though. So, but
I was just thinking. It's a really important point because this is not sort of, you are a startup. You're probably used to working sort of flexibly, whether it's in a workspace or from home occasionally. Once you take money from an investment fund, for example, you will be required to prepare for board meetings. Your workload will increase. You are on your way to becoming a corporate, essentially.
Yeah, I think
over time.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? I think lots of startups probably haven't had like the kind of board meetings that you'll be expected to have with your investors. We used to have those every month with our non-exec director when we had our agency, but quite a lot of the clients that I start working with, they are, not doing board meetings on a regular basis. We were doing them every month and reviewing our management accounts every month and all those kind of things. So I think I'd love to do an episode on the board and all those things at some point. But I'm just aware that time is cracking on, and I like to try and keep these relatively short. So it's been such an amazing episode to talk to you about these things, because I'm kind of learning a lot as well, even though I've been through some of these processes myself. But so once we've got to that point and agreed, everyone's happy with the documentation and who's going to sit on the board of directors, is everyone in a position to then sign and get the money? Or is it going to be more drawn out than that?
No, I mean, generally you will have everyone working towards the same completion date, and lawyers usually orchestrate that and handle the signing process, which is handled more often than not now electronically, especially given coronavirus, almost certainly electronically.
So I was just going to ask, so what is that? I know you're going to say, well, it depends on the size of the deal and everything else, but if everything was going really smoothly and everyone was prepped and it was like a really great situation, how long could you expect that to be, that process? Is it a week or like 2 months?
I mean, I'd say if everyone was organised, ready to move forward quite quickly, if it was a pure equity deal, you could probably complete within 4 weeks at the earliest. I think any earlier than that, I've not personally seen too often. It would normally be an advanced subscription round that's completed a lot quicker than that. That can be completed within a week.
It's good to know, though, isn't it, that process could take, if you're lucky, a month, if not a lot longer, because people need to start thinking about that for when, the amount of money that they need and when they actually need to start going out to investors, because the process obviously does take longer than a lot of people would envisage.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose going back to that point, and I think this is important for preparation as well, is trying to find an investor that will be strategic to your company. And looking at their portfolio companies and trying to see whether there's a fit for you, because that will increase the speed of the fundraise. Because if you're just approaching everyone willy-nilly with a random email, it's probably not going to work. Targeted focus is probably recommended.
Yeah, brilliant. So fantastic. So the money's then going to go to you, is it? And then not you, but you funnel the money from the investor into your client. Is that how it works? It goes?
Yeah, generally on a first fundraise, the lawyers wouldn't get involved purely from a cost perspective. You do see that on sort of pre-Series A, Series A upwards, the lawyers tend to coordinate the transfer of funds with client accounts.
I was just remembering when we sold our business, kind of like how it goes, from them into the lawyers or solicitors and then to you. But you're saying with a startup, there's no need for you to get involved with that. I suppose, yeah, exactly. It's not huge amounts of money, is it?
Yeah, and that's purely because either if it's high net worth angels, generally they're not going to want to each fund a client account of a lawyer. The lawyer will then need to undertake KYC and AML checks on each high net worth. It gets a bit tricky. So we tend to stay out from a cost perspective because we appreciate that the startup doesn't want to be spending thousands and thousands of pounds on the lawyers in the fundraise. They want to be spending that money on development and marketing post-completion. So we try to limit the costs and come up with a nice fixed cost solution so that when that money does hit the bank account, we can raise an invoice. They know exactly how much they're being billed, and then they can run forward with the money. That's
really great that you do a fixed cost, because I think, as you were saying at the beginning, that is a big concern. And it is. Everyone, lawyers are expensive, and they've got their finger on the clock, or however you describe it. And I think if you've got a fixed cost and you know what you're letting yourself in for, and that's going to kind of seal the deal, and that's fantastic. David, thanks so much. It's been really, really insightful. Is there anything that you would like to share with the listeners about fundraising or about the work that you do, or any, lasting call to action for them to think about?
Well, firstly, thank you for having me. It's been a
It's
pleasure.
been great. Thank you. There's loads of things I want to talk to you about, but we'll just stop here for today.
I think just one thing I could just sort of briefly touch on, which is probably of interest to a lot of people in the startup community, is this new government future fund. And just in terms of the topic we're focused on in this podcast today, it's not something that would be available for first-time fundraisers. So just to sort of let people know that not to waste their time looking into it, it's only available for sort of more secondary fundraisers once you've actually raised £250,000 of investment on a previous fundraise.
That's really helpful, actually, because I have been looking into that, and I did, it keeps popping up on LinkedIn and various places, and I keep thinking, gosh, is this available for some of my clients who are looking to raise money? But it's really helpful to know that it's not for those people on their first round funding. So thanks, David. That was amazing. And hopefully we can get you on again to talk about lots of other things around law and startups and fundraising and all the other things you do. And I really appreciate you coming on.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Starting to Scale with Emmy Faust. That's me. It has been great to have you listening again this week. If you know other founders that are looking to grow profitable, sustainable businesses, then please do let them know about this. And it would make my day if you leave me a review on iTunes and let me know what you are enjoying from this podcast. If you want to get in touch, you can do that through my website, emmyfaust.com. And don't forget, I've got lots of great resources on my website. Go to emmyfaust.com/free. Have a fantastic week, and I look forward to catching up with you again next week.